please welcome Graham Atherton from the National Education Opportunities Network, NEON.
Thank you, Gavin, and thank you for inviting me today. As Gavin said, my name is Graham Atherton. I'm Director of the National Education Opportunities Network. Hopefully many of you know NEON, know what NEON does. NEON's the professional organisation for those working in widening access. We're a membership organisation with over 150 organisations as members and over 100 universities and many other partnerships and third sector organisations. So thank you for inviting me, and I think before I start, I'd like to recognise the work of the Federation. You are one of the most long-standing regionally based organisations of this nature working in the widening access field in England. There's only probably one or two more really organisations who've been working in this space in this way for such a long time as the Federation has, and through the turbulent and differing funding times that we experience in our field, you've maintained the commitment and the infrastructure to deliver your work, and also through changing personnel as well. So that gives great credit to you. So I'm really happy to be here. I'd like to again recognise all the partners on the call really to think about the great work that this organisation has done and continues to do, and recognise the history that it has. In terms of what I'd like to speak about today, I mean, this theme is, of course, the idea of what widening access is going to look like in a post-COVID world. Well, I guess, the impact of COVID on our field and our work, like all parts of society, is huge. We've seen over the past year, all of us really having to pivot our work to an online format, online context, while the students that we work with have had to challenge, not only to contend with the existing challenges they have when it comes to progressing to higher education, but new ones associated with access to digital technology, access to digital support, as they are also forced to undertake their work in an online way. All this against the backdrop of a government whose support for higher education has been, perhaps at the best could describe as indifferent. And at the same time as well, obviously, as many of you will also know, in the mid part of last year, in the midst of the pandemic, the Minister announcing that they were no longer committed to a 50% participation target, and also casting doubt upon the merits and the work of organisations like the Federation, NEON and our members in terms of widening access to higher education. So I guess, that leaves us, one would think, I guess, in a challenging space, not just in terms of what COVID throws to us, but also politically as well. So where do you think things are going to be going forward? Certainly, I guess, in one respect, uncertainty with regards to economic circumstances generally leads to a push towards HE, and we've seen that. We've seen last year, perhaps a combination both of the pandemic and also differing assessment arrangements, of course, due to COVID, a significant increase in the numbers of learners progressing to applying and going into HE, as well as from the backgrounds that we support as well, which again will be seen, of course, also be positive. I guess going forward, what we'll be thinking about today is what the longer term thoughts are in terms of uncertainty, the sort of changes in the landscape of the labour market facing young people in particular, and older learners as well. Are the changes we see temporary, or are they permanent? I mean, we're seeing lots of attempts to understand this from research organisations almost continually. Most recently, predictions that possibly a quarter of the jobs that young people will take will not be there after the pandemic. So again, not only is that challenge how young people support themselves through HE, but it leaves us to think possibly about their own particular futures. And not only that, opportunity presented by COVID for a business to remove from their labour markets certain areas of low skilled work. So again, this probably does lead to a move toward greater HE participation to a degree. Not only that, we also have the ongoing impact through the next 4 to 5 years of an increase in 18-year-olds across the country. That will change. There will be a dip going into the 2030s, we believe, but certainly in the shorter term, there will be more like This is different across the country. It's very focused in London, but also in the South East and the area which KPMF serves. So putting this together, predictions could be that there could be possibly a move towards greater HE participation, which would favour the work that we're undertaking. At the same time, however, as I mentioned before, we have a government that's indifferent to this work. Well, interestingly, some of the arguments that you deploy to resist the idea of greater higher education participation, aside from the one that I think they really probably believe in, which is it's too expensive, is, for instance, the idea that graduate underemployment is a major problem. Very interesting as well to throw into this conversation is recent data shows that since 2018, the mismatch between graduates and the jobs they take, this idea that underemployed and graduates with non-graduate jobs has actually been coming down. It's come down quite a lot in the last year or so since the pandemic. It was coming down to 2018. But I guess that doesn't change the fact, politicians will see what they want to see. So I think what we have to be mindful of as well is, we do see possibly, a push towards HE for young people. At the same time, could there be controls on numbers? That's certainly a lot of talk in the sector about possibly the Auger review response and lots to come from the government. Will we see number controls being introduced by some mechanism because of the cost in a post-COVID context where money will be tight across government of higher education participation? Alongside that as well, a major threat to our work we have to be wary of is the change in level 3 qualifications as well. You'll be aware that there is at the moment still a commitment to abolishing and defunding the BTEC, most of the BTEC qualification. A quarter of learners who enter higher education from the low participation neighbourhoods do so with either BTECs or a combination of BTECs and A-levels. So the removal of the BTEC could significantly set back higher education participation, unless of course these students may take T-levels, may take TAFE and T-levels, but it doesn't look like that's very much uncertainty there. Much really to be thought about there in terms of how we support those learners in the forthcoming years who would have been learners who would have been taking BTECs if indeed that qualification is not there. What will that mean for the work we're trying to do to support progression to HE from those most underrepresented groups? And then I guess in terms of how we deliver our work, the big question will be, I guess, also a lot of our work's gone online, but as we move towards, thankfully, a more face-to-face environment again, what will remain of that work and what will not remain? Certainly, I guess, from the HE delivery point of view, you can expect that a lot of HE's delivery, core delivery to undergraduates, will remain more online. It does pose a question for access and outreach work, because it does possibly create a larger divide between those pre-HE and post-HE. Much more difficult, for instance, in pre-HE, sixth form colleges, etc., to move great parts of a curriculum online. It just won't happen. But it will be doing in certain parts of HE. It will make that transition point for students, particularly from the groups that we represent, possibly a bigger jump. Again, that's something really to think about. And finally, I guess, in terms of where the future may look like, I guess, and issues that we're very concerned of, is of course the UniConnect programme, which has been so important in supporting regionally collaborative outreach work across the country. As we know, we enter a final year, extension year of this phase, with then discussions of the programme continuing until 2025. Interesting history of such programmes. We're now over 20 years since the first real national collaborative outreach programme began, and we've had 6 or so iterations of such a programme over the past 20 years, despite the fact over that 20 years we had an interregnum of around 3 or 4 years where there's no such programme. So there seems to be a recurring recognition amongst policymakers of the need for such a programme. One thing I would ask us to consider, I suppose, is in the post-COVID context, where does UniConnect sit? Does it have a high enough profile nationally? Is it being connected with the broader, for instance, education recovery strategy that a government might want to take forward, or indeed an opposition might want to present? In a post-COVID educational recovery strategy, you would think the kind of work that UniConnect is doing is fundamental, but is it connected to that? That again is a political point, I guess, but it's one for where can we contribute to that through the work we do locally and regionally? Again, we're always talking about connections and synthesis across government, and it's challenging to do. But nevertheless, I guess what we do need to consider is how we can learn from the past as much as we can in terms of how we sustain and take these programs forward. We have one of the kind of drawbacks of the UniConnect structure, which is really inherited from the Aim Higher structure in the past, possibly because some people involved in policy terms are the same people, is that it creates very strong local, regional, collaborative arrangements, but very weak systems of pulling those collaborative arrangements together in a kind of national narrative. Thus, therefore, the connection between a lot of the work that's been done there and broader national political goals and political policy strands aren't made. Thus, therefore, weakening the case for the continuation of such programmes politically, but it comes down to that argument. And I guess that's again something that where can we contribute nationally, collaboratively together across country to do that. So finally, I'd encourage us, I guess, really to kind of keep that collaborative emphasis going in our work, obviously within the Federation and the partners here, but also extending beyond that, where through the Federation can you look to extend partnership with all the UniConnect consortia, other organisations such as KPMF, and also through NEON and other organisations can facilitate that. Because as much as, of course, the concerns with this work are, of course, inherently local with our learners, we have to also remember that what affects our learners at the end will be national decisions. We need to try and have our purchase upon them. I hope that's given us some thoughts. Again, in conclusion, we'll be a look post-COVID. We can always see things as optimistic or in a pessimistic way. But as we remain together collaborative through organisations such as the Federation, then it gives me and NEON and others hope, I think, that there'll be positive outcomes for the learners we serve through the post-COVID context. Thank you, Gavin.
Hello. Really great I'd like to be able to say great to see you all, but really great to be here with you all today. My name is Joni Chase and I am the FE Development Manager at KMPF. I am very fortunate that we work with 7 brilliant members of staff that are employed in the FE colleges. Most of them are with us here today and will be in the breakout rooms, so you'll get a chance to meet them later on as well.
Thanks, Joni. Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to see you all today. As Joni said, I wish I actually could see you. Some of you I've never actually met face to face, but I know many of you now. And for those that don't know me, my name is Helen Farrant, and I'm the school's development manager here at KMPF. So as the title of the summit suggests today, we're going to be thinking about what widening participation really means and how we can work together to reach those students who need it the most. We are very aware that there are some of you here that have been partners and members of KMPF for some time, and so much of this might be a bit of a refresh, but that we do have some new members of staff in our schools and colleges also joining us today. I think in light of this somewhat, I was going to say altered post-pandemic world, and I hope I can say that, hopefully I can say that, there are some difficulties and changes that perhaps COVID has also presented, which has really highlighted the need to focus on the specific needs of these different groups. But as a reminder, just for those of you who are new to the partnership, we are a federation, a long-standing federation partnership between the 4 universities in Kent and Medway, University of Greenwich, Kent University, Canterbury Christ Church and the University of Creative Arts. And we work with 47 secondary schools and academies across that area as part of our KMPF strand of work, and additionally 23 secondary schools and 3 FE colleges within our CAMCOP programme. Together we aim to raise the attainment and aspirations of young people in Kent and Medway who may not otherwise consider higher education. And so who are these young people that we're referring to? One way the government identifies who needs the support the most is by looking at what we refer to as underrepresented groups. And we'd like to start by asking you to think about which groups are underrepresented. We're then going to consider some of the barriers that these young people might face, and perhaps then take a look at how we can work together to reach these students that will benefit the most from engaging in the outreach provision that we will provide. We're going to start by gathering your thoughts on Menti, and some of you may have come across this in some of the sessions that have been delivered in your schools, and if you were at our autumn summit back in November, you will have used it then. So if you could go to menti.com and put the code in there that's on the screen. I'm going to switch over to Menti. Layla, please. Is she there? Thanks, Layla. Okay, the code's there if you didn't get it at the top of the screen there. And we're going to be asking which groups of students do you think are underrepresented or might be underrepresented in higher education? If you could just enter some of your thoughts, they'll pop up on the screen for us. It's slow to get going today. You can have up to 5, you can add up to 5 choices. Care leavers coming through quite strongly there. Working class boys is an area that we are often considering recently. Lots of different things there. Polar 1 and Polar 2 are the areas of disadvantage that we work with within our KMPF and KMCOP programme.
So many coming through,
students.
and they're
Sorry,
changing.
Jenny?
There's so many coming through. I'm trying to just see if they've all been covered.
Care leavers and looked after children are on there. Yeah, some really important ones. So many, as you say, Janie, just makes you realise how many groups there are and different underrepresented groups. I'm going to pass you back to Janie now.
Yeah, thank you very much for that input, everybody. I think there are a few that haven't been covered, which is good, which is why we're at the point of doing today. So we'll just wait for those to be finished and the next slide to come up. There you go. Okay, so as you can see on the slide here, there are 5 main groups really, which each university nationally, including our 4 KMPF partners, have to include in their strategic plan. Most of you will know, but some may not, that these plans are called Access and Participation Plans, or APP for short. And the purpose of these is to increase participation and also success rates at university with these groups of young people, or adult learners, as you can see. The APPs are how the universities are monitored, and this forms part of the governance way of charging tuition fees. So in order to charge the maximum tuition fees, universities have to offer a programme of outreach and support at university for these cohorts. So as we saw in the Mentimeter a minute ago, many of you are familiar with the top point there, and it's accurate to say that this is at the core of our work at KMPF. The first group is identified based on where a student lives and whether students are from low participation neighbourhoods. However, it's also worth saying here that a lot of this information we have is based on data or statistics, and we're aware that these are proxies. And as much as it is necessary for many reasons to use data like this, not least to demonstrate that our work has an impact, it's our key contacts, so you based in the schools, colleges, communities, who are ideally placed really to identify students who are from these other underrepresented groups where we don't necessarily have access to that information or data. For example, disabled students or children in care. I could spend ages going through all these different bullet points, but I won't. Just a quick comment on a few of them. In terms of Black, Asian, minority ethnic groups, on the whole, they're not underrepresented in terms of access to HE, but there are real challenges with postgraduate outcomes or postgraduate destinations. Graham mentioned about the UniConnect funding, so the KMCOP side of KMPF, and in terms of that mature or adult learners, there's an increased focus on this for next year. This is based really on the recognition that many mature students are from widening participation backgrounds and perhaps didn't get to access outreach whilst at school. In terms of disabled students, really just to say here that they're not a homogenous group. Disabled students can present a wide range of different needs, and you'll hear more about that later. In regards to children in care or those leaving care, this is very, very much a high priority group for our partner universities, as you will be aware. And we're also lucky in Kent and Medway to have the Care Leaver Progression Partnership. The other thing probably to note is that none of these groups, or that students, should I say, fall within many of these groups or can do. So it's certainly not as straightforward as a one-stop solution. But the good news is that due to well-established outreach offers from our universities, and with the support from partner schools and colleges like yourselves, some of these groups are already represented well in HE in Kent and Medway. And in addition, our partners are working really hard to ensure that support is in place to succeed once they get to university. We just wanted to touch, thanks Helen, or thought it'd be worth noting that there are a number of other groups as listed here that generally also have low participation in HE and who would benefit from access to a range of the support that our universities provide. KMPF is really interested. Sorry, we go back one, Helen, sorry, just so I can, thanks. Along with our partners to start developing discrete pieces of work or pilots around some of these groups on this slide. And although we don't have the time to talk about it all here, if you or your school is already doing some work or targeted support with any of these groups, please do not hesitate to contact either Helen or myself to explore further how we can support the different groups of young people. Thanks, Helen. So, why does it matter? Why is it important that we work with these different kinds of underrepresented groups? Really, it's vital, in my opinion, to acknowledge that underrepresented students in higher education are based on circumstance and lack of access to opportunities rather than their ability or potential to succeed. As you know, lack of access to opportunities can start from an early age. So, for example, if you've got a student from a less affluent background or perhaps a lower performing primary school or family with lower literacy numeracy levels or a combination of any of those, then just working with high performing students like those in top sets or just working with those who want to go to university already, get a lot of that working in colleges sometimes. We get people in groups who, oh, well, these are the students who want to go to university. Well, that could mean that we are perpetuating this cycle of disadvantage. Therefore, not letting students know about all the opportunities that could be available to them is only likely to restrict social mobility. The work that KMPF does with its partner universities aims to break this cycle, but we all know that we can't do it on our own, and schools and colleges and our new community partners are in the perfect position to be able to help us reach those who need it the most. And last point on that side, you really don't need me to tell you about the additional challenges that young people have faced as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. We all know that the roller coaster of the last year has only widened the inequality gap, and therefore ensuring that outreach is offered to those students who need it the most is more important now than ever.
I'm Laura, the School Support Officer at KMPF. Hopefully most of you have met me by now, but for those of you who haven't, I'm looking forward to working with you soon. As Helen said, we're now going to be hearing from some of our student ambassadors from across the partner universities. They're going to talk about their experiences from being from widening participation backgrounds and the barriers and successes they have faced in accessing higher education. We're very grateful to be able to hear from the ambassadors today. We often talk about widening participation students in acronyms and numbers. By hearing from the ambassadors, it will hopefully help us all to remember who the students are at the heart of our work. We're really hoping to have some Q&A at the end of the speeches, so if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll pick some out after everyone has spoken. I'm going to hand over now to Anton. He's from the University of Kent and he's going to share some of his experiences with you.
There we go. Can you hear me all right? Brilliant. So hi everyone, my name's Anton and I'm a first year computer science student at the University of Kent. I'm going to be talking a bit today about my experience as a first generation member of my family to go to university. So I'll be talking a little bit about the challenges that I had, and that it's interesting actually looking at the suggestions that you all put in. I mean, I could relate to so many of those barriers, and that the lack of parental support and the lack of understanding, knowledge, and really like the biggest one there, which was financial worries. And I think up until sixth form, for me personally, I didn't understand any of that. And it was definitely, for me, oh my goodness, that's a big financial investment. Is it worth it? I didn't know the ins and outs. I didn't have the information that I needed to make an informed decision. And so it wasn't until we had outreach work where the University of Kent ambassadors came in and explained things to me and my parents that I realized it was on the cards for me. I remember in particular, we had an event that was put on in the evening where we had a mature student come and deliver a talk about the just general university experience. And it really opened up my parents' eyes to the possibility, which then meant that I got the support I needed through them to help me get to university. And so it was really a culmination of those outreach events, workshops that I took part in. And I had a really fantastic teacher as well who helped coach me through my journey in sixth form and work towards the end goal of getting to university. Now, it would have been a lot easier if I'd had that outreach much earlier. I think year 9, even earlier than that, is a brilliant time, because if you can make informed decisions earlier on, then you can have such a smoother journey throughout your education. If I'd known I was going to go to university, I probably would have chosen different options at GCSE. I probably would have chosen different options going into sixth form, but I didn't realize at the time. And so if we can help future students understand that they can do it, they can go to university no matter their background, no matter what their circumstances, then we can help them get there in a much easier fashion, and so that they don't get to sixth form and then realize, suddenly I need to do all this and my options are limited and I have to work a lot harder. If we can help them just get through it easier, then that can really make a difference, and it will help people like me that were in that position just a few years ago enjoy university a lot more, and hopefully just enjoy their educational journey a lot more. So, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Anton. That was great. I think it's really interesting what you said about starting that process earlier, and how that maybe would have influenced you earlier, and it wouldn't have been maybe such a rush to think about going to uni, because you didn't know really about it until you were in sixth form. So thank you so much. I'm going to pass over to Michaela now. She's from Canterbury Christchurch University. She's going to tell you about some of the experiences that she's had.
Hello, can you hear me? Perfect. Thanks for the nod. Okay, so hi, my name is Michaela and I'm a care leaver. I'm here to talk about how being in care presented some barriers for me. I was academically a bright child, so I was able to get through the academic side of school easily. Whilst in secondary school, I moved houses 13 times. I was lucky that I was able to stay in the same school, which a lot of young people aren't able to. Moving around so much meant that I was often distracted, especially when it came to do homework and coursework. And because I was bright, teachers often let me off without any discussion. At the end of my year 9, I didn't do a portfolio that took 6 months in school, and no one batted an eyelid. But I did have great teachers that supported me despite of that. One thing that did stick with me from secondary school was a careers worker telling me that I wouldn't be able to make it to university because I was a foster child, and that I should just be a hairdresser instead. Now, this is important. When I left secondary school with my 11 GCSEs, A star to C, I went to college. Here I moved into a semi-independent house that didn't work, mainly because the other young person I was living with was a drug dealer. Because I had no one telling me that I had to go to college, I didn't go. I had bad mental health, so it was easier for me to stay in bed. After the first year at college, I dropped out. This was because I only managed to get 1 AS level in politics. I also never had any outreach at college, so university seemed very unattainable. A few years later, I enrolled at the local college to do hairdressing, and I was terrible at it. It wasn't until I was working at a job that had very long hours that I decided to need to do something else. Scrolling through Facebook, I found the university where I could do a foundation year in politics. I changed my course after foundation year to creative writing, and now I absolutely love it. I've just finished my second year and started my children's book. I have incredible lecturers who really listen to me and support me. There's also a dedicated team that look after care leavers. I also work for the school and culture engagement team, so I'm able to work directly with care leavers myself. Having received so much support from SCE, as it has enabled me to thrive. The first year was a bit rocky, but with the lecturers that believed in me and a strong work team, I'm finishing my second year, about to head to America to do my study abroad. Students are often told that they're independent when they go to university, but in actual fact, there's so much support available. This is one of the main messages I want to send, because I was, especially in college and in school when university was spoken about, and even when I go to schools now, teachers are like, you're by yourself, lecturers don't care, they don't know who you are. And I am on a course where I truly am known. My lecturers really do care. And with that, I'm able to do exactly what I want to do. And with my career, I'm fully supported. And so, yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Michaela. That was really nice to hear from you. I think your point around moving into independent living at sixth form age, at college age, and how that sort of put you off track a bit for you to go to university was really important. And it's something that we need to consider when we're working with young people in care, and the effects of moving from a supportive foster care placement to independent living and the extra challenges that faces. So thank you again so much for sharing. I'm going to pass over now to Rachel. She's from University of Creative Arts. Rachel, over to you.
Hi, I'm Rachel, and today I'm going to be talking about what it's like to be an estranged student. So, when it came to higher education and my studies, I was always very independent and ambitious. I knew that I wanted to continue learning and achieve more. Luckily, my school and teachers were very encouraging to the students that wanted to go to university, and to me, it just felt like the natural progression to continue into higher education. I had actually applied to study English literature at university, and through a lot of hard work and perseverance, I got all of my choices. I was very happy to set to be studying English. It was only when my art teacher spoke to me and asked if I considered studying an art and design foundation, as she thought I had potential. I had never heard of a foundation year before, so I'd never known it to be an option. I found out that the foundation year was 3 if I started before turning 19, and would also be able to keep my face at English for the year. The foundation year would act as a gap year, as an additional achievement to my CV, so there was nothing to lose. I studied my foundation year and got so involved and enjoyed it so much that I decided to continue at UCA and started my first year in fashion design. However, during my foundation year, my circumstances changed, meaning that I now classified as an estranged student. I struggled a lot in these years with my personal problems that were going on, as well as my other stresses such as my financial stress. My financial stress was so scary as I had to support myself on so many aspects, so much so that I was working multiple jobs to be able to carry on studying at university. This affected my mental health and was affecting my enjoyment of studying fashion design, that I didn't even know if I wanted to continue being at university at all. For so long, I struggled on my own, feeling alienated and sad that I wasn't having the experience that others were having. It felt like everyone at the time was having it so easy, having fun, achieving their grades, and I was struggling on so many levels. I finally decided to talk to a financial advisor who told me with out-of-date information that I would get the minimum, if not none. This affected how much I wanted to continue being at uni. I finally spoke to one of my friends in the course who encouraged me to seek advice from the student union, who then, along with my tutors and other financial advisors, told me that as I now are classified as an estranged student, I could apply for extra support through student finances. I didn't even know this was an option at the time. With the help of my tutors, they supported me in my application, and I finally received the extra financial help that I was entitled to. I finished my year of fashion design and decided that I actually wanted to study interiors, and spoke to my tutors to change my course to interior architecture and design. I'm now in my final year and set to finish the course in just over a month. So what to take from my story is that circumstances change. There is no correct route into higher education, and that everyone's journey is completely different. I was struggling with so much and for so long that if I just spoken to someone and asked for help a lot sooner, then I could have made life a whole lot easier for myself. Some of your students may be going through unexpected and sudden changes of circumstance and may feel like their original plan isn't an option, but it is. Just please ensure that you have the correct information, as it can make all the difference into how someone will progress into higher education. I also want you to know that it's okay if students decide to change their mind, and that usually changing course is an easy way to go about it, and that they can always choose the right path for them.
Rachel, you speak wonderfully. I think your point around what we're going to say around like the misinformation and how that really could have affected your progression to higher education carrying on in higher education was really important. And it's so difficult because there is so much information out there, but if we need to make sure that we're giving students the right information so that they are armed with that, so that they can make the choices that are right for them. So thank you, that was great. Going to pass over to Zoe now. Zoe is from the University of Greenwich. Zoe, over to you.
Hi everyone, my name is Zoe. I'm a mature student in my third year at the University of Greenwich, studying a BSc in Human Nutrition. My journey to HE took a bit longer as I came under some of the groups Helen and Joni spoke about, such as being a mature student, a parent and a carer who's experienced mental health difficulties. I fell pregnant and had my son when I was in secondary school, and despite being a high achieving student, I was discouraged to continue my education as the focus was on the difficulties I would face if I continued, ranging from what other students' attitude would be towards me to managing workload. Despite the lack of support I received from staff in secondary school, I achieved 11 GCSEs A to C. I thought sixth form would be different, but I faced the same challenges and lack of support. I left having failed biology and only being allowed to stay on the condition that I changed to a humanities subject, as science obviously wasn't my strong point, despite being labelled gifted and talented in science and doing triple science GCSE. I left and went to a college, achieving a triple distinction in level 3 extended diploma in medical science, and took a break from education as that was when my dad's health issues and my mental health struggles began. I always wanted to pursue a career in science, but it was the nutritionist who supported my dad in hospital which inspired me to choose the nutritional field. I started at the University of Greenwich thanks to my own research and my mum having worked there for 20 years. I was introduced to Start lead Melanie Fawley, who let me know there would be support available, such as counselling, a personal tutor, and the Start initiative that you'll hear more about today, which I have utilised throughout my degree. I have managed to juggle university, my mental health, caring for my autistic son, my disabled parents, and working part-time at events such as this, which highlight the value of diversity in education and society. Takeaway points are, I wasn't the first or last student to get pregnant at my school, but I was the only one who left with their GCSEs during my period there, despite the borough having one of the highest teenage pregnancy rates in the country. This screams of missed opportunity and unfulfilled potential. Different qualifications can suit different students. It's quite a shame to hear about BTECs because I think if they weren't available, I probably wouldn't have made it into higher education. I would advise students that while university does require a higher level of independence, there is support available, but it can vary based on which university, so check the offers. And there is also financial support available, such as the Parents' Learning Allowance and Childcare Grant for full-time students through Student Finance, or also there's another one called Care to Learn, which is a government scheme which also gives childcare payments.
Thank you, Zoe. That was great. I think you clearly have faced a lot of adversity in your progression to higher education, and to see how you've worked through that and you're there now is incredible. I think you're very inspiring. It's just a shame, I suppose, that it took so long for that to happen for you. Maybe it could have happened earlier if there'd been some more intervention and more support a bit earlier in your cycle of progression.
Thank you.
Got any questions now? This would be a really great time to ask those. I can't see any.
I'm just having a look in the chat, Laura. If anyone would like to put any questions for any of our ambassadors into the chat, that would be great. I think,
or you can ask them live if you'd like to as well, if you're confident enough.
If you'd like to unmute, that's fine.
I'm sure that you've seen it, or to all of our ambassadors. There's so many positive comments and thanking you for sharing stories and giving people ideas for work or things that they need to be doing differently. So really, really valuable. But yes, please do ask any questions. Now is the time. Got a great group of ambassadors here to to speak to and seek their opinions.
There is a question in there, and I'm going to aim that to Michaela. Says, what do you wish you had? Hang on. What do you wish you would have had support-wise, Michaela? I think you might be. I'm thinking about that phase in supported accommodation. Maybe what would have been good for you support-wise? It could have helped you a bit.
Like I was really lucky to have a amazing social worker. I can't remember what they're called. PT. I think they're called PAs after. Anyway. Who really supported me with like college and stuff, but there's just a big gap because you're not expected to go to university, and after that fell down, I ended up having to go into the YMCA, where another care leaver was, and it was just such an expected route. And I think it's the main support from schools and colleges, realizing that actually when a young person is 18, they're more than likely getting kicked out of their foster home because the foster carers are no longer getting paid for them. And that's really the sad reality, is that actually that really happens. And you know, I was moved on at 17 and a half, so still a child. So it's the support there of being like, okay, you are moving houses, which happens a lot. And essentially, even from my foster carers going into, we had staff, they didn't know nothing about higher education, they hadn't been. And so it's having that point of call in schools and colleges and higher education to be like, hey, we know you're moving house, is there anything we can do to support? And having that check-in. And I know that it's tough because there's hundreds of university students, but there's so little care leavers at university. And I joined university on the cusp of 24, so at 25 you're no longer like, your class is a care leaver, but you're not. Like, luckily, you know, I get all the support from the SEU team and Jamie, and I do get a lot of support. But it's catching care leavers before they go past that point. And so it is having someone who can check in. And I know that's really hard, especially in this day and age, but having someone to say like, hey, you know, what is your situation now? Like, are you moving into semi-independent? I think that scheme was actually scrapped because it was awful, but yeah. It's just having that point of person, I think.
Thank you. There was another question in here around hang on, how I've lost it now, there's too many. Where's it gone?
I think you're looking for, what is the one piece of information universities could have provided to make your decisions or applications easier? So is there one key thing, perhaps from each of you, that you think if you'd known that earlier, or if you'd had that piece of information, that would have made difference? Should we start with Rachel? Sorry, who was that? Anton?
Who wants to go first?
You go first, Anton.
Okay, so one piece, that's a difficult one. I think really it's the obvious one. It is financial information. For me, one of the biggest things, coming from a single parent household, I was lucky enough that I get the maximum amount for my maintenance loan. But that also means that in the long run, you have to pay more back. So it's roughly £9,000. And then you have the roughly £9,000 tuition fee. And so for each year of study, you're looking at 18 grand of debt, effectively. Now, it doesn't work the same way as traditional debt, which is what I think the misconception is. People think, you know, you're going to have to really pay a serious amount back each month, and it's not going to be feasible, and if you don't get a job, you're going to a good job, you're going to struggle. It's not like that at all. You know, it works out to be a really tiny percentage, and you only pay back if it's over the £25,000 threshold, and you only pay back, I think, 9% of the difference between that and whatever you're earning. So you know, it's a real misconception that you're going to you're going to struggle to pay back all this debt. At the end of the day, it sounds like a lot, but when it's broken down and explained properly, you realize actually it works out about each week, or I can't remember, each month, it's the equivalent of, I think, £30 or something like that. And when you think of it, that's like going out for a nice meal, you know, with your partner, for example. It's really not as extreme as it might sound at first, and that does put off a lot of people. So I think having that information sooner would definitely help me, and I know it would help a lot of other people as well.
clearly very clued up on it now, Anton, so that's great. Rachel, was there any piece of information that you would have wished that you'd had?
So I think like all the information was there. I think maybe I just didn't look at it, or where I was going through some things, it just didn't consider to be an option for me. At UCA we have like the gateway services, and now I use them so much, but back when I started, like I almost felt like embarrassed, like because I'd never heard of estrangement and I was going through this. And I think maybe just sort of just telling students that like actually all the information is there, just like look and find it, because I don't know, like I was sort of embarrassed to like seek it and ask for help. So maybe just ensuring that universities, like the staff there are people and they're like there to help you and like guide you, like, and they always have like your best interests like at heart. So maybe just sort of I would have maybe like the advice that maybe just like the reminder that universities are there to help, like, you know, it's people. And yeah, so if that makes sense.
It does, thank you. Zoe, to you.
When I first started my degree, I was going to do part-time because I was working as a receptionist at a like an NHS walk-in centre / doctor's surgery. I just thought to myself, I can't cope with full-time university. I won't be able to afford it. So I went into university with the thing that I would do part-time, and then once I'd actually started, I found out that the difference between full-time and part-time was like an extra 3 hours on a Monday. And I thought to myself, like, it's going to take me however many more years for the difference of 3 extra hours on a Monday. I could actually just, if I committed to this and did full-time, I'd get, you know, the full funding rather than do the part-time funding. And it definitely was the better option for me. I think I literally went to my first lecture, turned around, saw my personal tutor / program leader, told her I want to change to full-time. And for like the first month where I had to give notice, I was working about 7 days a week straight, because I do about 3 days at uni and then the other 4 at the work. And I think they're about 6 to 8 hour shifts. So it was definitely killer, especially like being a parent and everything. So I think just really, like, if someone wants to do part-time, maybe like explain better to them about what the difference between part-time and full-time is.
Thank you. Michaela, what would you have wished you'd known, or what universities they could have let you know?
I think one of the main things coming from a Kelly's perspective is housing, especially over summer, because I know that when I was thinking about university and stuff, they wasn't too sure, but now obviously now work, and a lot of students are saying like, well, where would they live over summer? And it's vital to let students know that as a care leaver, there is summer housing options available. And in some instances, the local authority do pay for your rent. And I think that's something that colleges can find out, or like higher education can find out with students, because it does differ from borough to borough. I was lucky that my local authority did pay for rent for the first semester until I turned 25. But it's the knowledge that actually it is the financial side, but especially housing, because most of them don't have anywhere to go. So yeah, I think that's the most important thing, is to say, hey, actually, you know, there is housing available, and kind of like the bursaries and extra support that care leavers do get for being looked after child.
Thank you. There's quite a few comments in the chat about can ambassadors come into schools and talk to our students. I wanted to say that student ambassadors are at the heart of a lot of the work that happens across the partnership. So on many sessions there will be representation from student ambassadors, so that your students are able to see someone like them, and hopefully that will motivate and inspire them as well. I think it's probably all we've got time for in questions wise. I just want to say a massive thank you to the ambassadors for speaking today. I think we can all agree it's been very impactful and has demonstrated the importance of outreach and how it could support students who are facing similar barriers. I'm going to pass over to...
Sorry to interrupt, Laura. I've just seen that we've got a raised hand from Jamie Stevens, so I don't know whether it's a question or a comment. Jamie?
Sorry.
Thank you, Joni. Thanks, Laura. I think it's more of a reflection about what we've just heard. I was trying to come up with a question, but it's escaped me. I just three short points, if I might. I just wanted to congratulate the universities in identifying 4 students that have such inspirational stories to share this morning. In each of the examples we've heard of discouragement, probably unintentional and probably based on the circumstances of the individual, but the stories that we've been hearing clearly show that regardless of an individual situation, that ought not to be a barrier to higher education. It would also show, particularly in Zoe's example, that those light bulb moments in terms of determining one's own future can come from anywhere. In Zoe's case, the nutritionist that was, came through her lived experience. And I suppose it just highlighted for me the importance of maximising those opportunities for young people in schools and colleges, exposing them to employers, to higher education, and also to their peers, such as the 4 students that we have today, because there's nothing more powerful than hearing these types of stories to really demonstrate to the young people that, if students such as these that have been through, Michaela's example, so much disruption throughout her teenage years, can achieve what Michaela's been able to achieve. And I know she's off to America next year, and as part of her course, and that's really going to be a life-changing experience. I'd just like to thank Michaela for all the work she's done for us. But if they can show that to young people, then it's clear that it's possible for them. That these barriers, they are there, they are real, but they should not impede progression to bigger and better things through higher education. So that was just my reflections, and thanks again for those inspiring stories.
Thank you, Jamie. Yes, I think that's so thought-provoking, and thank you to all of you, because I think it's given us all of us a lot to think about and reflect on and to learn from. So thank you again.
As you know from our earlier section, one group that's frequently underrepresented in higher education is disabled students. So I have a few minutes now to talk to you about the SEN Progression Partnership, so I'll make sure that I make it brief. Thanks, Helen. If you go on to the next slide. Thank you. So the partnership was created as part of KMPF, with a particular focus on supporting progression pathways for disabled students considering or thinking about, or perhaps not thinking about, higher education as a pathway. Partners include KMPF, student ambassadors, Zoe's on our Start Planning Forum, multiple departments from our university partners, so not just outreach teams, but also working with wellbeing services. Organisations like My Trust and CXK, and also other organisations, third parties, charities, for example, who are committed to improving the progression opportunities for disabled students. We did start out, it's probably worth me saying quickly, that we started out as a disabled learner progression network, but then we spoke to a lot of schools who just weren't familiar with the term. So even though in universities we refer to disabled students and working with in schools, SEN or SEND is a much more common term. So we became the SEN Progression Partnership in September 2020. I won't read through all the bullet points that are listed here. Oh, sorry, go back one, Helen. Slides associated with that. Yeah, I won't read through all the bullet points that are listed here, but just wanted to point out really that mental health is included, and we all know that there's been a steep increase maybe over the last decade or two, but even more so over the past year, and really to encourage your students considering university that there is support available, and please do reach out for that support. So our overarching aim is to support transition to higher education for disabled students. So next slide, sorry, I feel like Boris here. Thank you. Over about 18 months ago or so, we began to explore the local context and existing support within Kent and Medway, and we focused on the 4 points that are mentioned there. So we spoke to loads of people, some listed at the bottom there, that progression mentors, thank you for your time, people in schools, colleges, universities, students, parents, across the board, to try and identify what were the current working practices or situations in schools and colleges, what support was already available, what perceptions, again looking at what those barriers are, but always it's not just about focusing on the barriers, it's about focusing on the solutions or the factors that enable transition or progression, not just to higher education but to all kinds of different pathways in general. And we ran a survey in lockdown take 1, so I think it was April 2020, and we had a really high response rate, over 60 different schools and colleges, and got a lot of information there about the barriers and enablers. And as I said, had meetings with people that are listed there. And what we found is that there are a number of barriers and they fell into 3 main categories. Next slide. Thank you. And those 3 main categories of barriers, lack of information, attitudinal and systemic, I could talk about these for hours, but obviously I haven't got the time. But there were 3 mirrored solutions. So for each barrier, obviously there was a way that people, schools, college progression mentors were identifying that KMPF and our partner universities could work together to try and address those. So information sharing, communicating on many different levels, but also working with the outreach teams. So at different stages in different partner universities, but the wellbeing services and the outreach teams are beginning to work together to have training all about inclusive design and accessibility, and really making sure that it's included as part of the outreach programme, and so that's progressing quite nicely. We had our first Send Progression partnership meeting or planning forum in September 2020, and we've met half a dozen, maybe 8 times now, but we are still yet to meet in person. I can't wait for that day. But we have managed to identify our key priorities and develop a strategic and delivery action plan. So we're trying to work strategically, but also deliver outreach and webinars and all kinds of things as well. So on the next slide, it highlights our key priorities. I won't go through the objectives here, but if anyone's interested or wants to know more, please do contact me. The key priorities are that information sharing and communication. We've been doing this through a series of webinars, which I'll mention in a moment. Stay on this slide for a sec. Aspiration raising in terms of outreach. We are looking at developing specific events for disabled students, as well as making sure that wider events are inclusive. The partnership working side is very much about working with other partners like our local authorities. So we're working with the local authorities and the local offer to ensure that outreach and university is included there, because as the previous slide said, it's very much about not just engaging staff and young people, but parents as well are so influential. That was part of our conversation a minute ago, that parents are so influential in some of these decisions. So if you go look at the next slide, Helen, thanks. A significant part of our work is the webinar series, which we've been running since April 2020. There's a list of them all here, and they're all available to be watched retrospectively, and I'll share a link in the chat in a minute. And there are 5 more webinars to go this year, and again, we can share or send out the Send Progression Partnership webinar schedule if you haven't seen it. Just looking at time, there are 2 specific days that are going to be run in June and July as well, hosted by START, who you might get a chance to speak to Melanie or hear from Melanie later. One for staff and one for students. And if you can't make these dates, then START and the ambassadors, including Zoe, can also deliver workshops virtually or in person in your school or college. So basically, the next thing to say is if you would like to know more about these, then please do sign up to our mailing list if you haven't already done so, which is on the next slide. The webinar survey, which you'll have the link to, is a chance to really sort of focus that content as well. So we want to respond to the needs of you and your students. So please do, that's a great chance to fill it out, but also identify where the gaps are and sign up to that mailing list so we can keep you updated in the future.
Okay, welcome back from the break, everyone. I hope you're suitably refreshed and eager to listen to my exciting segment on data. As Gavin said earlier, if you have any comments or questions, please do go ahead and type them into the chat. And if I have time at the end, I'll cover them. Or if not, be sure to I'll get back to you as soon as possible after today. I've been the Data Processing and Reporting Officer at KMPF since November. Here's a photo of me busy in the office, crunching numbers and analysing data. I like to do the same thing in my spare time too, but at the poker table, although not so much in the last year, unfortunately. Now, to give you an overview of what I'm going to cover today, we've heard that the theme of this summit is resetting the scene. So with that in mind, I'll be talking about the following areas in relation to data at KMPF. Firstly, why we gather it. Secondly, the types of data we capture. Of course, how we go about collecting it. Crucially, what we do with that data. And then finally, at the moment, we're conducting a review of all the reports we provide our stakeholders. And I'd like to give you a quick update on that. So, why do we collect data? Essentially, our primary aim is to identify the students who are likely to benefit the most from taking part in the HE outreach opportunities that our partners provide. These students often belong to underrepresented groups that we heard about earlier from Helen and Joni. And in order to identify the students who would benefit the most, it's crucial that we collect as much data on them as possible, and then employ tried and tested ways to analyse that data, then share it back with our schools and colleges in an accessible format. They can then target resources on the students where the outcomes from attending outreach opportunities will be the most profound, hopefully resulting in widening participation overall in HE, and also promoting equal opportunities, which is something the OFS is very keen to see. Now, moving on to the types of data we gather. Most of the data we collect is related to two key areas. Firstly, the outreach opportunities that run, plus associated information, such as which students have attended them and the number of contact hours delivered. Here we can see the wide range of activities that will be available to students in normal times. And in the past year, we've seen a huge effort by our partners to switch to delivering as many of these as possible in the virtual environment. At KMPF, we're really keen to capture information on the attendances at activities so that we can analyse the effectiveness of them and evidence to our stakeholders the widespread take-up that we try to help stimulate. Secondly, relating to individual students, basic things like postcode, where they live, or what institution they attend, but also other factors that would make them statistically less likely to go to university. For example, if they're disabled or none of their immediate family have been to university before. But there is data that we don't collect. And that's not to say that this data isn't important, because it certainly is. And students that are in these categories can really benefit from attending outreach opportunities. The proportion of care experience students attending higher tariff universities has remained at just 1% for the last decade, while for their peers who do not have experience of care, the proportion has risen by 3 percentage points to 11%. For our attendees from partner universities out there, we recognise that you're monitored on the proportion of your students that are care experienced, and the OFS is really keen to raise progression to university for them. The OFS hopes to run a large multi-year project to test a consistent offer of support for care experienced students at local level. It wants to work with students, universities and colleges to build on existing local networks, such as the UniConnect partnerships like KMPF. We look forward to hearing more about these developments later on in the year, hopefully. Joni alluded to this earlier, and I'm sure that in recent times, some of you have probably noticed an increase in mental health issues among your students. It's more important now than ever to support their emotional well-being. Actually, one of our CPD sessions later is focused on this area. We know that at the moment, the economy isn't particularly strong, and there will be many households experiencing reduced income, which can have a detrimental impact on children. And finally, we don't collect information on student performance while they progress through the years at school. So for students whose marks may be slipping, attending outreach activities can give them a nice boost in motivation and get them back on track. I think it's important to remind at this point that outreach activities should certainly not be restricted to just high achievers. So for students affected by the above categories, because we're not able to identify them, this is where you progression mentors and teachers out there can really help by encouraging them along to the outreach activities. In order to find out who the students are we want to focus on, we capture data from a variety of sources, which I'll briefly cover on this slide. KMPF has one of the largest data sets in the country, tracking tens of thousands of young people on their journey towards and through higher education. We gather data ourselves via three main methods. Firstly, we request outreach participation attendance lists, which our partners kindly ensure are filled out. These enable us to see how popular the activities are and which students are attending. I'd like to say thank you very much to our partner universities for capturing this data. It really is appreciated. Secondly, we use data from outside organisations to help us identify students who would benefit from outreach opportunities. Examples of the data would be Polar4 or IMD. And finally, we ask our KMPF programme schools to give questionnaires to their students to fill out. And I think it's at this point that I really must pay tribute to your hardworking progression mentors and teachers out there. Thank you so much for getting the students to fill these out. We request students are baselined in year 7 and then again in year 11, so that we can analyse how their knowledge of HE has changed over time and also capture any new children to the schools. On the screen is a paper copy baseline questionnaire, which we're really keen to move away from because students can be more efficiently surveyed using laptops, tablets, or even their smartphones. Getting this information electronically is much more accurate and saves us a lot of processing time. Oh, just a quick reminder here for our KMPF schools that I can set up an online survey link that's unique to your school, so do get in contact for that. Then, what do we do with the data? Well, a lot of the primary data we collect, we upload to the Higher Education Access Tracker, which was initially developed by the University of Kent and then rolled out to be used nationwide by all the regional UniConnect hubs like KMPF. So very much a success story from the University of Kent. It holds a wealth of information about students and the outreach activities too. It does also capture secondary data from over 80 organisations, including those we saw on the previous slide. This all means that HEAT can provide a monitoring and evaluation service for organisations like us who engage in widening participation to education. Tens of thousands of young people from the local area are now on this tracker, and we continue to monitor them for some years after they leave school to see if they do enter HE at a later stage. This is done by HEAT cross-referencing the data sets provided by the Higher Education and Statistics Agency. So with all this data, we provide various reports to our schools, which hopefully some of you have seen examples of in the past. However, it does depend on what strand your school is in. So I'll now go over the different types of report that we can provide. For the KMPF programme schools, we provide summary reports, which look like this. They contain lots of information about the students to really help schools target outreach opportunities on those who would benefit the most. We can only produce these if the students fill out our baseline surveys. Now this next slide shows reports that are available to all of our schools. Delivery leaflets with infographics showing headline statistics on things like the number of activities and how many students have attended. Then we have the more comprehensive delivery reports that give more detailed numbers. These two are generated from the information that's in HEAT, in particular data around the activities. There is also a postcode checking report, so you can see if any of your students live in specific catchment areas, such as CAMCOP. Just a quick aside regarding this one, on our website you can check individual postcodes where students live, but if you have a really big list that you want to check, then just email that into me, as I'm able to run an automated report in HEAT to get that information a lot quicker than manual input. So all of these reports help you to identify the students to target resources on. They help you to analyse the level of attendance at outreach activities, and they help you to evidence to your stakeholders, such as governors, parents or Ofsted, the effort that you go to in order to help students reach their academic potential. Ordinarily, we would automatically produce these reports annually for each school, but over the last year, due to various reasons, we've faced numerous challenges, meaning that we are currently unable to do this. And as we know, the number of activities themselves have been very low compared to previous years. We've also not received many attendance registers for the online activities that have run. All of this means that our data for the past year is not as comprehensive as usual. However, if you would like to receive any of these reports, then again, just get in contact with me and I'll be happy to produce them for you. I mentioned earlier that we're actually conducting a review of these reports, and at some point in the future, we'll be reaching out to as many stakeholders as possible to gain a wide variety of thoughts and opinions. As a result of the review, we would look to implement any changes from September for the start of the next academic year. One of the changes will probably be implementing baseline surveys a bit more widely to schools who are only on our CAMCOP programme, as we've seen the benefits for our KMPF programme schools of filling these out and sending the information back to them. Right, I'm now going to scan back over the chat to see if there have been any questions that have been asked. I can't see any further questions, but thank you all very much for listening to me this afternoon.
I'm absolutely delighted to introduce you to Professor Sharia Hoskins from the University of Portsmouth.
Hello, thank you very much for inviting me. So I am going to do that very scary thing of attempting to share my screen. So bear with me while I get onto the right place. So Gavin, is that working?
We can see it, yes.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm also just going to keep an eye on time, because I fear that I've got rather a lot to go over. So I might go very, very fast, but I'll leave you some references at the end, and feel free to ask me any questions, and I'll try and leave 10 minutes for questions. So I was part of, got the funding for and led a project. Gosh, I can't even remember how long it was now. And as we all know, time is sort of morphing, isn't it? I think it was 2 years ago. Reducing stereotype, threat and implicit bias as barriers to student success. So our partners were several other universities. Our funder was initially HEFCE, which obviously during the project transitioned into the Office for Students. There were two key theoretical underpinnings to this project, work that I've been doing for a long time in building growth mindsets. And that's a personal growth mindset, but also a cultural growth mindset. And that's really, really important, as you'll see in a moment, because I try for this work not to do what some psychology work often does around the idea of resilience or mindsets, which is to create a sense of deficit model that it's in the person that we've got to change them. It's actually about shifting the culture and bringing everybody together. But helping personal resilience is another factor there. But also something that was new to me, which was tackling unconscious bias. And we were very lucky on the project to have the expert advice of Professor Patricia Devine from the US, and she actually was funded to come and work with us and visit us during the project. She does an awful lot of work in unconscious bias and sort of taught me everything that I know about that. So there are links there to a little bit more information on those theoretical underpinnings if you want to look at those. So as I say, we try to avoid the deficit model by not focusing on students or any one group of students. This was about pulling all students and staff together. This is a systemic problem, and we wanted to create cultural change. Those theoretical underpinnings I've obviously just mentioned. We've actually tried and tested these models. Patricia Devine tested these in educational and work environments in the US, and this was her first UK intervention. And I've done lots of work from nursery school children all the way through in compulsory education, right through to FE and HE with the mindsets work. And that had been actually evaluated in 2 funded evaluations with mixed results, because it's quite a complex area. It's not as simple as people think, and I'll try to talk about that a little bit more in a moment. One of the key things that comes out of all the work around unconscious bias and mindsets is it does give people shared terminologies to really start having some of those difficult conversations. So even if you don't get the change you want as quickly as you want to see it, you do get really good shared terminologies for those very difficult conversations, and it's those difficult conversations we need to be having. So first of all, what is mindset theory? Okay, so lots of people have probably heard of this, so I'm going to give you a very, very shorthand sort of description, definition of that. I'm going to use the lay people's terminology rather than the psychology terminology. So growth mindsets and fixed mindsets. So growth mindsets very simply are the belief that you can continually grow, learn and develop. Fixed mindsets are the belief that, you know, intelligence or any sort of capability is something you were born with and it's really not going to change very much. So why should we care about that? First of all, that is a very, very simple way of conceiving of mindsets. It's not that simple. People can pretend to have growth mindsets if they think that's what is wanted in the environment. People tend to carry different mindsets for different subject areas, and we sit on a continuum somewhere between the two, and it shifts according to the environment we're in. If we've got a teacher, for example, that uses a very fixed mindset language with us, then we are going to shift more towards a fixed mindset. So the idea that you are either wholly growth mindset or highly fixed mindset is a bit of a misnomer. I just wanted to make that clear. Sorry, just an alert just went off on my computer. There's another meeting I meant to be at, but I chose to be with you all instead. Okay, so why is this important? Well, in psychology, obviously that's what I am, a psychologist, we know that the fundamental beliefs that you have impact your behaviours and attitudes, and your behaviours and attitudes impact your success, your outcomes in life. Or your behaviour, you know, the way that you engage or the way that you perceive. So we always start with beliefs, and mindsets are a belief, and we know that this impacts learning orientation. There's a lot of evidence around this, so I'm going to just talk you through this in terms of learning environments. So if you've got this belief that you can always grow and change, learning for you is about interest, excitement, improving myself. But if you believe that you can't really change, then when you go into a learning environment, it's quite tense, it's quite nerve-wracking, because if you don't perform, then that's who you are and people will see that. And if it's not good, then that's going to make you feel bad about yourself. So you focus on the performance, on looking clever. People with a growth mindset, therefore, embrace mistakes. Like, wow, that one was interesting. What did I get wrong there? See it as information, feedback on mistakes, information on how to grow, how to learn more, learn better, learn a different way. But for a person with a fixed mindset, it's embarrassing. It's a sign of their low ability. It's going to relate to wanting to run away from that, avoid that task in the future, avoid it in the here and now. So a challenge then for somebody with a growth mindset is really welcome, and they will embrace that. But a challenge for somebody with a fixed mindset is going to lead to very low self-esteem. Now, anybody who fails in an environment is going to have low self-esteem. But with somebody with a growth mindset, they can recover that very quickly. And they can recover that by trying harder, trying a different way, trying a different strategy, persevering. But somebody with a fixed mindset doesn't believe that that's going to change. So they don't have that functional strategy as a way out of that situation. So what they will do is use dysfunctional strategies, avoid that task, cheat, lie, avoid effort so they don't look stupid when effort doesn't relate to outcome very quickly. So you have very different types of learners. The behavior you will see will be very different. And as a result, ultimately, the outcomes are very different, because we all know that somebody that perseveres is going to ultimately find a way through that and do better, regardless of their start point. So then on to the unconscious bias element. So first of all, what's the stereotype? Well, you probably know this, a widely held belief, fixed or oversimplified image or idea of a particular person, particular group, that you then apply to any person that has similar characteristics of that group. A bias is when those beliefs are negative and detrimental to any person or group, and unfair. Unintentional, unconscious, implicit, automatic, got many titles, bias, is when you're doing that without really realizing that you're doing it. And there's one other critical point about an unconscious bias. It's often not aligned with our conscious value system. Okay, and that's important for a later solution in a moment. So, can we avoid unconscious bias? Well, it's really important that we understand that as human beings, we're receiving 11 million bits of information every day. We cannot process all of that. We can only process 40 bits. So 99.99999% of what we do and how we think that leads to our behavior is going to be unconscious. So no, we can't avoid unconscious beliefs. So can we avoid unconscious bias? I'll talk a bit about that in a moment, but first of all, I want to let you know that as individuals, our performance is impacted by those stereotypes. Just the sheer existence of them, even if somebody around you isn't exhibiting unconscious bias, there is such a thing called stereotype threat. Now, this means there's a definition there that you can look at, but I'd rather give you an example to illustrate that. It means that if you are somebody that has membership of a group that has stereotypes attached to it, and that part of you becomes salient, then you will perform in accordance with the stereotype. Now, I'm going to give you an example here. Women can't parallel park cars, right? Okay, there's the stereotype. I can parallel park a car, but if I was parallel parking a car and a bunch of builders were stood on the sideline as I did it, and they wolf whistled me, which makes me feel saliently female, then that stereotype threat enacts, and I will not be able to parallel park that car. We know this is true. There's some wonderful experiments where we gave psychologists gave men and women maths tests, and they measured their performance, and comparably they were fairly similar. Then they gave them another maths test, measured their performance again, and their performance, the female's performance went down, and it went down much lower than the male's performance. So what had changed? The females had been put in bikinis, making them saliently female. So in the second test, they were sat in the room doing those tests in bikinis. So you might be saying, well, of course they're going to do worse. They're probably very cold and very self-conscious. But interestingly, they were also given a literacy test at time 1 and time 2, and their results didn't change in literacy. That's the power of stereotype threat. So we know that stereotype threat can have an impact in education. I'm not going to go over these examples, but here are some research examples, just so you know I'm not making it up. There is evidence behind this. So what can we do to help this? Stereotype threat, unconscious bias. Well, I think part of the answer is in mindsets, but first of all, let me just tell you what doesn't work. Stereotype suppression doesn't work. We have to process information unconsciously. I've just demonstrated that a few slides ago. Humans can't do anything but. We don't have the capability to do anything but process information unconsciously. Also, human beings are destined to categorize, to make those decisions faster And we are also destined as part of our cognitive functioning to make comparisons in group and out group of people that look similar to me, speak similar to me, or speak differently to me. We make judgments based on that. And we know from Cherie's summer camp studies, it's very, very difficult to avoid that. So there's no point saying, don't have unconscious decisions, can't do it. No point saying, suppress your stereotypes. We can't do it. They're going to come to the fore. It's like saying to you, don't think of a white elephant. You're going to think of a white elephant. In addition to that, there's no point believing in personal objectivity. There is no such thing for humans. As I've just said, humans are made up to categorize, to make in-group, out-group decisions. What we actually have to do is start adding additional cognitions and additional elements of processing to help us. So these are the strategies that don't work because of the way that humans operate. We can't avoid that. These are some of the things we can do. So first of all, let me say this must sit in ourselves and in the way that we support other people. It must sit in a different conceptualization of prejudice, particularly around unconscious bias. The old framework of prejudice is very much along the lines of, and I think we think this in ourselves, prejudice is bad. So if I think or act with bias, I must be a bad person. And therefore we try to hide our prejudice. We're scared to talk about it. We're scared to point it out in people. We've got to change context, conceptualization, so we can have conversations without making people feeling bad if they're making these errors. Because largely, okay, not wholly, but largely people who make prejudiced or biased decisions or say something that might be racist or sexist or making assumptions about disability, there's this assumption that people must be bad because of that, and it's simply not true. And we need to move on to a new framework. Prejudiced thoughts and actions are habits that we all have, and breaking these habits requires more than good intentions. When somebody has a habit that is prejudiced or biased, it doesn't mean that their moral core is wrong. It's probably, as I said before, the complete opposite of their value system. Obviously not for everybody, but for most people. So we need to create an environment where we don't make people that bad for making these mistakes, and therefore we can start talking about it and dealing with it head on. So one of the other things you can do, as I say, it's about adding cognitions, not trying to change them, because we have certain cognitive processing. So it's about adding cognitions. So for example, we can recognize when we've had a stereotypical thought. Every kind of thought that we have, we can ask ourselves, is that stereotypical? We can recognize that. Or when we see a portrayal in society that's stereotypical, and we can challenge it either out of ourselves or within ourselves, in our own minds, in our own cognitions. Is that a fair portrayal? And then replace it with a non-stereotypical response. For example, I know someone who their identity doesn't fit with that stereotype. For example, they were great academically and they've achieved wonderful things. And I've got a photograph here of, I don't know if anybody knows who that is. This is Karen Blackett. She was one of our students, so she's a great example. She achieved great things. She was a geography student and she's now our Chancellor. She is one of the most powerful Black women in the UK, in the most powerful 100 women's list. So the other thing we can do is counter stereotype imaging. So we can regulate our response, again, be aware of the response, front it ourselves, don't hide away from it, don't think you're a bad person because of it. If somebody else is doing it, sort of tell them. If you're doing it yourself, tell yourself, and then come up with a counter stereotypical image. Before you know it, this will start to become automated in yourself, and if we do it enough in society, hopefully those stereotypes won't exist any longer. So for example, here's a wonderful example of a Black female astronaut. You might think of a CEO who is a woman or from an ethnic minority, but think of those counter images and it will start to become automated. We also need to individuate instead of generalizing. So here we've got a lovely picture of a girl not doing so well at maths, but it's not because she's a girl. She's just not doing so well at maths. So we need to stop making those snap and generalized decisions based on stereotypes, because that will then come out in our voices, and that's very, very dangerous. Growth mindset is also fantastic. So if we can develop that growth mindset and use growth mindset in voices, we know that you cannot hold a stereotype and a growth mindset, because a growth mindset says everybody can develop to be better. There is no limit to that. A stereotype says this group of people can't do this or can do this better. Those two things can't coexist. So what we found in studies is when we started to develop a growth mindset in students is it starts to erode the power of a stereotype threat on them. And we've actually then found that their performance increases. So how do you do that? Well, in an environment, culturally, contextually, first of all, to develop a growth mindset, you create space for discussion and celebration of mistakes and the learning from it. You make sure you understand, and everybody that you're working with, your students and your colleagues, understand that no one can accurately assess potential. Believe me, psychologists have been trying for years. Therefore, if no one can accurately assess potential, you shouldn't try. You should therefore have high expectations for everybody. Expectations equal outcomes, so high expectations for all. And that's fair, right, and just, because you can't assess somebody's potential based on anything, not even their previous attainment. And avoid the talent luck stereotype myth. So if somebody performs really, really well, don't say, wow, you must be really talented, or wow, you were really lucky, or wow, yes, you're really good at running because you're black. It is simply not true. It came through process. It came through work, effort, training. And we need to make sure that comes across in our language. So praise should be around process, product, outcome, not some idea of an inherent ability. And use evidence. This is something we did a lot on the programme that we did. We used evidence to address myths. So we found with 5 years of pre-cohort data across the Changing Mindset project that entry tariff didn't predict outcomes. And this was one of the myths that our staff held. And this, of course, has been shown in lots of national research as well. But there were other myths. So we'd say, so, OK, why do you think your Polar 3 students are doing worse? Well, it's because they all come from the same area in London. And those schools are bad schools. So we go to the data and said, not true. Try again, until we could get them to understand that they might hold some responsibility in some of this lower performance. So data was really, really important. We did find that growth mindsets were linked to both negatively and positively in the directions you'd expect to wanting to create more inclusion and overcome bias. Staff and students with fixed mindsets were more likely to hold stereotype beliefs. And there was a statistically significant negative correlation between growth mindset and stereotypical beliefs. When we'd intervened, we found that there was a significant reduction in stereotypical thinking in our students who'd attended the growth mindset workshops. And that was all students, not just students from certain groups, as I said. Unfortunately, we couldn't assess this in staff because not enough gave us the pre and the post data for us to make that analysis with any confidence. There's some references for you. I have shared my slides, so these are available. I'll open up to questions now.
I'm really pleased to introduce Shelby Holmes.
Hi everyone. Lovely to be here. I'm Shelby. I'm 27, and I'm gonna kind of tell you a story about my background and sort of where I fit in all of this, I suppose. My background is traveling showman, so that's a particular group of the traveling community in the UK that are based on fairgrounds. So it's very much a fairground industry, not usually involved in any other businesses. This is distinctly different from other traveling groups such as Romani Gypsy, Irish Traveller, Boaters. There's several different groups. My maternal grandmother was Romani Gypsy. She married into a traveling showman family, and all my other grandparents are traveling showmen. We can track our heritage all the way back to John Brown, who was a consort to Queen Victoria and entertained the royal children in Scotland with his travelling menagerie. So it's in the blood. We've been doing this a long time. My parents' relationship with education was not fantastic. Both of them were kicked out of school aged 12 and 13. While at school, my mother was given a colouring book and told to sit at the back of the classroom because showman children, travelling children, not really worth the effort. My father and a number of other showman children who were at his school were given a burnt out car around the back of the school to practice on, because that would be practical skills and they could use those skills, much more valuable than being in the classroom. Consequently, neither of my parents have excellent numeracy or literary skills. They can just about read and write, but not fantastically, and both sets of grandparents were illiterate. So they didn't have a fantastic foundation in institutional education and very minimal trust in those institutions. So they have me and my sister, and we as a family settled in North Wales, where there's a number of generations of travelling showmen here settled down to work in the leisure industry. So our lives revolved around the family business, which in the summer was an amusement arcade on the seafront, and in the winter was fairground equipment, which we travelled with throughout the country. So we worked as a family unit, we worked together, and we worked with other families. And that was our lifestyle. We travelled in the winter and we were stationary in the summer. In the summer, I went to a local state school. The individual teachers at that state school some of them were very good because they'd had previous experience of showman children. As an institution, they didn't really have any policies in place to kind of deal with any children from the travelling community. So my parents wanted both me and my sister to read and write, and I, from the get-go, was a very good reader, loved reading, my absolute passion, burned through books. And my parents were quite happy to indulge this. But the kind of most important thing for our family was working as a family, working as a unit, and traveling in the winter with the fairground equipment that we had. That was the focus. So when it got to maybe 16, 17, and I was still reading and still very keen on schoolwork and doing very well, very gifted and able, as they called it then. I'm not sure if they still call it that now, but that was the category that I was. I was looking at universities and maybe thinking of doing that, and my parents were still very much sort of, well, why would you ever want to do that? That's crazy, because there was no trust there from that side, from my parents' side. And the wonderful speaker, Jason from the Literacy Trust, there was an excellent quote from him talking about getting parents involved and where are parents invited to be involved. And my parents certainly were never invited to be involved at any stage. But I had one wonderful English teacher who was my biggest cheerleader, huge support to me. And we had just come back from the Oxford St Giles Fair, which is a street fair that happens right down the middle of Main Street in Oxford, surrounded by the colleges. And we had just come back from that. I had done that with my father, and I had loved the city, fallen in love with it. And I was quite sheltered when I think back, but that was really my first opportunity to look at a university town and see what that was. And I genuinely thought there were probably maybe 2 or 3 universities in the UK, and I knew that Oxford was one of them. And I kind of looked around and gone, well, this is quite nice. I think I'll go for this one if I do go. This is quite nice. I had very little understanding of how exclusive it was or that it was a big deal. This was just an interesting place for me to be. And the fair comes here every year, so it kind of slots in nicely. So I went back to my state school and said to my lovely English teacher, I quite fancy Oxford, that looks nice. And she was delighted. She's like, oh yes, it's very important for you to be ambitious, and I think that's exactly where you should be aiming for. And that meant nothing to me. I didn't realize that it was going to be a big deal until I got to the interview stage, and that's sort of when it set in and it seemed, oh, this is actually quite exclusive, and people like me don't normally go here. The discrimination that I faced was very different from the discrimination that my parents faced. My mother, all of her front teeth are false, because when she was walking to school as a child, the other local children would throw stones at her and her sisters so that is how she managed to lose her front teeth. The closest I've ever come to being physically assaulted was when I was 14 and I was walking out of a fairground in New Brighton and onto the main street, and a car drove past full of teenage boys, and they started throwing bricks at me and my friends. None of them hit, but I remember seeing one smash at my feet and thinking, oh, people hate me. I'm not sure why. So very different experiences, but the discrimination still very much there, and institutionally as a school is a lot of implicit discrimination. For example, as you can imagine, my attendance was incredibly low during the winter because we were traveling, made up for a little bit in the summer, but still pretty bad. I think my highest attendance was my final year of A-level, and I think it got up to the heady heights of 67%. So I remember one year I had particularly low attendance, and the school threatened to stop me from going on the annual summer trip to Alton Towers, as if somehow creating the ultimatum between participating in my culture and going on an Alton Towers trip was going to fix the problem. But as I said, some individual teachers really made the difference, and I don't think I would have applied to university at all if it hadn't been for my one very dedicated English teacher, and she really was my biggest cheerleader, and I'm very grateful for that. The only reason that I ended up going is through that teacher, and of course my own interest, my very keen interest, and my great love of reading and my great love of the subject. And the way that we did that, the way that we got through to applying and actually getting there, was a sheer force of will. There was no intervention. There was no, you know, this is a way forward, this is how you do it. It was pretty much me and my English teacher against the world. My parents, whilst lovely, beautiful people, were also full of fear and uncertainty, because they had a way of teaching me a lifestyle that would bring me an income, and the path of higher education held no guarantees as far as they were concerned. Made as much sense to them, me going to school, as it might be for any of you, for your children to go off to the circus. You know, why on earth would you do that? It's got no promises for you whatsoever. You know, they could see a way of teaching me a source of income, and they just didn't see the value of higher education as a way forward for me. And it was only that I was passionate and adamant that that was what I wanted to do. If I wanted to be a plumber, we wouldn't even be here, but luckily it was English literature. I've spoken at other teachers' conferences before, and the question that comes back a lot is teachers who are quite afraid of setting up their students for failure. Why would I introduce applying to university, or indeed Oxbridge, as an option if, you know, there's a chance that they won't get in? You know, I'm setting them up for failure. The question horrifies me every time, because life is full of disappointments, and if you're not going to start hitting them at 17 and 18, you're going to be in trouble. You know, you need a couple of knockbacks, especially when you're that age. So you should never be afraid of, you know, setting them up for failure. You're giving them more options. You're not setting them up for failure. You're opening a door and saying, this could be a path for you. And it's incredibly important. I get a number of messages every month from other traveling showmen, often in their 50s and 60s, saying, gosh, I wish I'd done this, or I wish I'd gone to school, or I wish a teacher had asked me if I wanted to do this, because I think about it very often, and sometimes it's engineering or mathematics or whatever. And I hear so many of these stories, and I think of all the wonderful talents and all the incredible potential that's locked up in our culture and was never quite released because of numerous barriers and challenges that perhaps would have been scaled if somebody at school or somewhere along the line had opened a door for them. And you know, they've all gone to lead wonderful lives, and the culture is vibrant and strong, and I'm very proud of it. But they can do so much more, and it really does rely on a helping hand from very often a teacher or a staff member. So yeah, I ask you, please don't make it an act of sheer will on the part of the student or on the part of a teacher. Please help it to be a more comfortable process. I broke through a glass door. Please just open the handle for us next time. If anybody has any questions or would like to ask anything at all, I've heard absolutely everything. There are no stupid questions, so happy to take that on. Thank you.
That just leaves me to wrap up today, really. So I just wanted to, before we go, just say a few thank yous, really. Firstly, thank you to all the speakers we've had today and all the facilitators as well. Without the event, without them, the event just couldn't really have happened, and they've really brought it to life. So thank you very much. Thank you also to the KMPF team and Layla behind the scenes, who's been doing all the tech stuff today, and our student ambassadors from the University of Kent. Philip, I think, is going to put a link in the chat now for a feedback survey. We'd be really grateful if you could just take a moment to sort of give us a little bit of feedback so that we can actually continue to develop future events as well. The purpose of the event today was really to give us time to sort of pause and reflect on how we can support young people in a post-COVID world. And I think it's given everyone sort of food for thought going forward. So as we head sort of towards the end of this academic year and then into the new one, I think we as a partnership remain committed to supporting young people from underrepresented groups to consider higher education. You've heard today from a number of students who have overcome barriers to attend university and further their studies and careers. If you feel that we can support young people that you're working with in your school, college or community group, please do reach out to us. We've got obviously existing outreach offers, and as we've sort of said today, previously, we are happy to sort of talk about other opportunities where possible. And that just leaves me really just to say thank you again to everyone for attending. We really appreciate you sort of turning up today. I know everyone's very busy, and have a fantastic rest of the day. Thank you very much.